How you begin your morning is how you build your life. This is not a motivational slogan. It is a practical observation about the mechanics of human performance, one that the most consistently successful people across almost every field have understood and acted on, often without being able to fully articulate why. The first hour of the day is not just the first hour. It is the tone, the temperature, the direction. It is the difference between a person who moves through their day with intention and a person who reacts to their day as it arrives, pulled in every direction except the one they chose for themselves. Most people give their morning away, not deliberately, not with the conscious decision to hand the most valuable hours of their cognitive day to other people's priorities. It happens by default, through the phone picked up before the eyes are fully open, through the inbox that sets the agenda before the person has set their own, through the news and the noise and the notifications that arrive with the patient insistence of things that have been waiting all night to be the first thing attended to. And then the day begins, not from a place of intention, from a place of reaction. And a day begun in reaction rarely finds its way back to intention. It simply continues reacting, all the way to an evening where the things that actually mattered somehow never got done. George knew this feeling intimately. He had been living it for years. Stay with us because today we are telling the story of a man whose mornings were costing him more than he realized, and the unexpected shift that finally showed him what the first hour was actually for. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe, because somebody out there needs to hear exactly this today. George was 38 years old and his mornings were controlled by everything except him. This had not always been the case, or at least, he had not always been aware of it as a pattern. In his 20s, the chaos of a morning had felt like energy. The rush, the juggle, the coffee consumed standing up while scrolling through messages. It had felt like the natural texture of a busy life, evidence of a person with things to do and people who needed them. He had worn it lightly. By 38, it no longer felt light. He ran a small consultancy with 4 employees and a client list that had grown steadily over the previous 3 years to the point where it demanded more of his sustained, focused attention than he consistently felt able to give. Not because the work exceeded his capability, he was good at what he did and knew it, but because the quality of attention he brought to the work had become unreliable in a way that troubled him. Some days he was sharp, present, decisive, able to move through complex problems with the clarity that had built his reputation. Other days he felt perpetually slightly behind, chasing the day rather than directing it, arriving at every meeting or conversation or decision already slightly depleted, already carrying the accumulated weight of a morning that had never quite come under control. He had noticed the pattern. He had not identified the source. His mornings followed an architecture that had assembled itself without design over years of accumulation. The alarm went off, usually at 7, occasionally at 6:50 with the optimistic intention of a few extra minutes that never materialized into anything useful. The phone came off the nightstand within the first 60 seconds. Not with any particular intention, just with the automatic reach of someone whose hand had made this movement so many times that it no longer required a decision. The next 45 minutes happened to George rather than being directed by him. Emails from clients in different time zones that had arrived overnight, each one carrying its own implicit request for attention. A messaging thread from his team about a project that had encountered a complication. News headlines absorbed without retention. Social media scrolled without purpose. His brain, barely emerged from sleep, being asked to process and respond and assess and decide before it had been given any opportunity to orient itself toward what he had actually planned to do that day. By the time George was dressed and moving toward the door, he had already spent the clearest minutes of his cognitive day on other people's agendas. The work he had intended to prioritize, the thinking that required his best attention rather than his available attention, had been pushed to a later in the day that was always more fragmented and more depleted than the morning he had given away. He arrived at his desk reactive. He stayed reactive. And at the end of days that felt exhausting, he would often look at his task list and find that the things that had moved were the things other people had pushed. And the things that mattered most to his own vision for the business were exactly where he had left them the previous evening. The shift arrived through a conversation he had not anticipated with a person he had not expected to learn anything from. George had a standing monthly lunch with a small group of business owners in his network. Informal, unagended, the kind of gathering that was more social than professional but occasionally produced something useful. On this particular occasion, the group was smaller than usual, reduced by scheduling conflicts to 3 people including George and an older woman named Patricia, who ran a design firm she had built over 20 years into something considerably more substantial than its origins suggested. The conversation had drifted, as these conversations do, toward the question of how people manage their time and their energy across the demands of running a business. George had made a comment about feeling perpetually behind, not dramatically, just chronically slightly behind, and Patricia had asked him one question: "What does the first hour of your day look like?" George described it honestly. The phone, the emails, the news, the reactive drift toward whatever was most immediately present. He expected a nod of recognition, the shared acknowledgement of a busy person who understood the demands of a full inbox. Patricia's response was not a nod. She said, "You are spending your best hour as a customer service representative for everyone else's priorities. And then you are wondering why the work that requires the best of you never gets done." She said it without judgment, in the tone of someone delivering a practical observation rather than a criticism. But it landed with the particular force of something that is immediately and completely recognizable as true. George sat with it for the rest of the lunch and most of the drive back to his office. That evening, he did not make a complex plan or research morning routines or build a spreadsheet of optimal habits. He made one decision, small enough to be kept and large enough to matter. The phone would not come off the nightstand for the first hour after he woke up. Not for messages, not for email, not for news, not for anything. The first hour belonged to him, to the work that required his clearest thinking, to the priorities he had set for himself rather than the ones that arrived in his inbox overnight. The first morning was uncomfortable in the specific way of someone who has removed a habit before fully replacing it. His hand reached for the phone twice before he caught it. The absence of the usual input felt strange, slightly untethered, like starting a drive without a destination loaded into the navigation. He sat with the discomfort and used the time to review what he had intended to accomplish that day, to spend 20 minutes on a strategic document he had been deferring for 3 weeks, and to arrive at his desk having already moved something that mattered before the day had made its first demand on him. The difference was not dramatic. It was not the kind of transformation that announces itself clearly in a single morning, but it was real. The document that had been deferred for 3 weeks was finished by the end of the week. The quality of his attention in early meetings, which now happened after an hour of intentional work rather than an hour of reactive consumption, was noticeably better in ways his team commented on without knowing why anything had changed. He extended the practice. The first hour became sacred in the way that non-negotiable things become sacred, not through discipline applied against resistance, but through the accumulation of evidence that the thing being protected was worth protecting. He added a brief review of his 3 most important priorities for the day, not a long list, not an ambitious inventory, just 3 things that would constitute a genuinely productive day if they moved. He added 10 minutes of something physical, not intense, just enough to shift his nervous system from sleep to presence before the first real decision of the day. The architecture of his morning, once assembled by default, became assembled by design, and the days that followed those mornings were different in a way that compounded. Not every day, some days the world arrived with demands that no morning routine could fully insulate against. But consistently, reliably, more often than before, George moved through his days feeling like someone who had started on his own terms rather than on everyone else's. The work that mattered got done, not because he had found more time, because he had stopped giving the best time away before the day had properly begun. Successful people are not superhuman. They do not have more hours than you. They do not have a different relationship with discipline that was installed at birth. They do not experience motivation differently or feel the pull of distraction less strongly or wake up every morning already energized and ready. What many of them have, and what the research on high performance consistently confirms, is a deliberate relationship with the first hour of the day. A protected period, however brief, in which the agenda is theirs before it becomes anyone else's, in which the clearest thinking available to them is directed toward what they chose rather than what arrived, in which the day is begun rather than reacted to. The secret is not complicated. It is not a 5-step system or a complex optimization of sleep cycles and supplement timing. It is the simple, repeatable, quietly powerful decision to own the first hour, not for productivity as an abstract value, for the specific, concrete, entirely personal work that only gets done when you arrive at it with your best attention rather than what is left after the inbox has taken its share. George gave his mornings away for years. The day he took them back was the day his days finally started going the way he had always intended them to go. Your first hour is waiting. What you do with it is the whole day. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.